grateful for the love and the care that you all put into this group and the community that you've built. And, something my parents always raised me to really follow in terms of guiding principles. There are many guiding principles, but two in particular that I'll talk about tonight is number one, following my truth, like my heart always, while always asking, how can I be of service? How can I help in this world? How can I be useful? Like, there's this saying that service is the rent that we pay to live in this world. And, it's like, how is it that I can be a part of this larger community? And, it goes to the fundamental roots of what namaste means, right? This notion that light that's within you is the same as the light within me. And so, we are working for each other's liberation. And, I always thought when I was younger, I was going to become a doctor. I thought I was going to get my MD, PhD. And, I was very excited about it. In high school, I worked in a lab and in a hospital. And then in college, I was working in a lab doing pediatric oncology work. So, cancer-related research. And I was also working in a homeless shelter and, and doing other kinds of service. And one night I went to college in Illinois in the United States, and it was very, very cold. It was like -20 wind chill, which is -20 Fahrenheit, which is extremely cold. And the rule at the homeless shelter that I was working at is that people had to be there by midnight, otherwise they couldn't be there. And there were a set of regulars that would always come. And there was one in particular who hadn't come, who I knew very well. And normally I would be part of the search party to go find him, to get him into the shelter and be safe. But I was also working in this lab where I was in charge of a set of cells that, if I didn't feed them at a particular time, then my professor's 9 months of work would actually die. And thankfully, there were other people who could go and be a part of the search party. And so I'm running to my professor's lab. And as I was going, as much as I cared about that work, I thought to myself again, what is going to feed my soul and where can I make the biggest impact? And I felt I really want to work on issues related to inequality and poverty and these systemic issues. And so then the following year, I started to think, okay, where else should I be putting my energies? The following year, there was what's called a hate crime. There was someone who went and he shot people who were different. He shot people who were Jewish, who were Black. And, he believed that people who were white were the ones that should be supreme. And so he made his way down to my college town. And there was a group of us who said, no, not in our town. That's not how we're going to have things happen. And so we started doing a lot of work related to anti-hate, anti-violence. And I was in my favorite class. It's an immunology class. So it's understanding, the cells and kind of our immune system. And one day I found myself imagining that the white blood cells on the screen and white blood cells eat pathogens and eat germs. We're actually eating white supremacists. And so it made me really think, where really should I be? I only am one life, I only have so much energy in this life. Where should I be devoting it? And so I thought, I really do want to explore other realms. And so I actually, then instead of going to medical school, I went to work in NGOs and nonprofits in the Bay Area. And while I was out there, 9/11 happened. So, in September 11th, 2001, there were, as you all know, people flew planes into towers in New York, and many people were killed. But it was also followed by a lot of discrimination of people who were Muslim because, and people who were brown generally in the United States, because people suddenly were very scared. And there was a lot of intolerance and lack of understanding. And even in the Bay Area, and so in California in the United States, it's known to be a very liberal place where people, are very open and whatnot. But even there in Berkeley, California, there was this child, a Sikh child, a Sikh child who got his head beaten against the sidewalk until the blood stained the sidewalk. And the superintendent of schools said that it was an isolated incident. And so once again, I was reminded of the time in college of thinking about anti-hate and anti-violence work. And so we had this group called the Alliance of South Asians taking action. And so then we did a lot of education in schools and, how is it that we can open people's minds to not just tolerance, but acceptance. And so again, it was thinking constantly of what is my heart and what is my truth and where is it that I can be useful? And again, this made me think if we want to solve issues related to bias and injustice, then we could think about really we should be going to preschool teachers because they work at the source, and that's where so many prejudices and beliefs are really shaped. But the fact is there's a lot of power in higher education and in the government. And so basically I went to go learn more about that and learn more about how to influence education policy. And while I was there, one of my mentors said, and I had wanted to go work internationally. And actually there was an opportunity to go to Iraq to help work on their higher education system. And in that time, though, that was when the US was going to war there, and there was, a lot of violence. And it was certainly giving my parents much trauma. And one of my mentors said, actually, why not go to India? Go to the place of your roots. You were born and raised in the United States, and you've always wanted to go to India and make it your own. And so this is an opportunity if you want to go abroad. And so, there was this organization called Indicor, which brought people of Indian origin who did not live in India from outside of India back into India to do service. And, there's this partnership between Indicor and, NGOs and then the individuals. And it was a really amazing experience because for the first time, I could make a connection with this country of my heritage that, I had heard stories about and I had visited throughout my childhood and had fond memories in terms of my family, but, they had always been very protective of me. And, this was an opportunity to suddenly take, to go into villages, to live in slums. And actually outside of our office, there were these 3 children who always were kind of hanging out. And typically they actually worked with one of them worked at the chaiwala, another generally was begging, and another worked with a shoe shiner. And so, at lunchtime, we had just like a tiffin. And so we sat outside and with these 3 kids, and they came. And one of the people I worked with always believed that if you had just as simple as a nail cutter and a comb, you could really make a connection. And while my Hindi and my Gujarati were not so great, I knew my numbers, and you could always do math with them. And, so we would play around. And so then we just started to say, okay, well, today the letter of the day is ka, and the number of the day is do. And then we would just kind of do very basic lessons around, that letter and that number. And then we would share the tiffin. But the deal is everybody always had to wash their hands beforehand and, wash their feet. And then we would do this. And slowly these numbers started to grow. So it was just these 3 kids, and suddenly it was 5 kids, and suddenly it was 10 kids and a mother. And suddenly, we kept growing. And actually what was amazing was that the chaiwala and the shushainwala and whatnot actually really encouraged the kids who worked with them to come and spend that hour with us. And what was amazing was, there were these mothers who, they had time to make vats of khichdi, and they would bring it. And, someone would bring a vat of dal. And suddenly we had this whole little school that was just literally on the sidewalk, on the side of the street. And then eventually we actually had 50 kids who were coming. And so there was a university nearby, and they allowed us to use this open space within their grounds And, basically the reason that I talk about this is that it was a very simple notion, right? I mean, I call it a school, or, you can call it a street school, but it was really just us talking with the kids and doing very basic addition or basic, numbers and letters, and then playing some games and making those connections and those human connections. And yet it was something where, it was following, our heart and my heart. And yet while thinking about how is it that I can try to make things a little bit better than they were before. And to be clear, this is something that then the kids really drove. They started to say, okay, this is going to be the agenda. This is, next time, this is what we're going to, this is going to be the letter and the number. And, one of them was in charge of bringing the chalkboard, and, another was in charge of bringing the bucket to be able to wash hands. And so, I think that it's just, I'm grateful that my parents always taught me this, that it doesn't take much, from the youngest of age. It could be as simple as you're walking with a bag and, you pick up any trash along the way, or if you like to plant trees, just plant one. And it just takes one step to be able to do something. And, it really is, what is it that you love and care about? And then apply that to something outside of yourself. So, and then, from there, I've continued since then, but I'm happy to, open it up to hear how other people think about giving themselves and following their truth in their heart. And yeah.
One minute, I will unmute everybody. Yeah.
That was great to know about your experience and your work. It's amazing. And you mentioned about the street school. Which location was that? Which town was that? I missed it.
It was in Ahmedabad, Gujarat.
Ahmedabad, okay.
Yeah. And so then actually when I left India, an organization called Pratham took it over. So Pratham then was also running other street schools. And so they then incorporated it as one of their own. There was another organization called Manav Sadhana, which is actually based at the Gandhi Ashram. And it was actually through them that I got the idea in the first place, because they also run various street schools. And so what was nice is that, it was started by, it was, first supported by Manav Sadhana. And then what was nice is that Pratham could take it over and sustain it moving forward.
Great. Just want to introduce that my daughter also has one NGO since last 4 years. She has 130 plus people working in her NGO, and this is especially for dural and underprivileged children, education for rural and underprivileged children in many different kinds. And they have different projects. One of the during the pandemic, they started a project called Digital Omega. And in that project, they distributed tabs and mobiles to the people through the school children, where in their home, nobody has a smartphone because their education was disconnected, and they distributed to many those kind of underprivileged children, and they restarted their education. And now they are running another project called Mission Million Books. In all tribal and villages, they are setting up library, because there's no library in the schools. They have just a curriculum-based books in the school. So they are setting up libraries. Already they have done in more than 100 libraries. This year, their target is 1,000 plus libraries across India. So how can her NGO get associated with you? And is there anything which you feel can be helpful to both?
I mean, it's wonderful, wonderful work. And, it sounds very inspiring, and that's really wonderful that she's doing this. And I'd be delighted to meet her and talk with her.
So I'll connect her with you. If somebody can share me your contact number, I can connect her with you, and I'll also share my daughter's number. Vinayji?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I will send the number to you.
Okay, fine. So I'll share my daughter's number, then they both can connect and then decide how they can take it forward.
Okay, Anjali, there is still 4 minutes left. do you want to talk about your experience with in San Francisco with Make-A-Wish Foundation?
Yeah, well, actually, I think what I just to, if I have a few more minutes, then, something that another issue that, so while I was living at the Gandhi Ashram, again, you never know what the, what influences are going to, stick with you in life. But Gandhi cared a lot about cleanliness and sanitation, and said, cleanliness is godliness. And actually at the ashram, they have something called a toilet garden, so different kinds of toilets, because in rural areas, there's not much water. And so you have to be very creative to think about how are you going to contain waste so that there's just not open defecation everywhere. And so that between Manasada and this other organization, Safai Vidyalaya, I just became really interested in that. And so then, in the time that I was living in India, that's when the Asian tsunami of 2004 happened. And so I moved down to Tamil Nadu to work on tsunami rehabilitation. And that's, when I really started to think, because, one village would be doing one thing and another village 5 kilometers away would be doing something completely different with the same resources, but none of them were learning about, well, how did they deal with the Gujarat, how did they deal with the aftermath after the Gujarat earthquake? Or, why are we not learning from other disasters that happened? And so, I was emailing with an advisor of mine for my master's program, for my graduate program. And they said, oh, you should, come back to graduate school and we'll teach you about this. And so, through graduate school, I went to graduate school at Harvard, and I went back to India 3 to 6 months every year. And I was working on this project, which was focused on education microfinance. So how is it that people can get funding for education expenses and other health expenses? But while I was visiting villages and schools, I would also ask, well, where are you going to the restroom? Because, after living at the Gandhi Ashram, I was really interested. And that's when these stories would come out. And, kids would say, oh, we go out in the open or behind the school sign or behind the bushes. Jyoti went behind the bushes, but the boys came and did bad things to her. And so now she can't come to school. Now, of course, she was the one who was punished. It wasn't her fault that happened, but the boys were still allowed to be at school. And I'm so scared it's going to happen to me that I don't eat or drink during the day. So sometimes I get faint or dizzy because I can't concentrate because I don't have food or don't have water, but it's better than the alternative of not being able to come to school. Or during a household visit, a 12-year-old girl talking about the wonders of education. And I'd be like, but it's during school. Why are you not at school then? And she said, I had to miss every, a few days every month when I got my period. And I missed during exams. They wouldn't let me retake them. So I failed out. And so then it made me realize, and you talk to parents, well, why did you stop sending your daughter to school? You sent her to private school and paid for school up until she hit puberty. And then you took her out of school. And you realize actually, it's not because the parents don't care about their daughter. It's actually because they care so much about their daughter. They didn't want her to get raped or molested or hurt in some way, such that actually the most responsible thing they could do as a parent is to not put her in a situation where her honor could be denigrated, such that then she couldn't get into a good marriage. And, taking any judgment aside, if that is what in the situation that you're in, that is going to be the best outcome, that you need to get your daughter married into a good outcome, into a good marriage and a good family, whatever that means, then you don't want to hurt your daughter in some way. And so it really opened my mind to saying again, and I think it just adds to, my mother would always say, kill them with kindness, but also, approach them with compassion. And this notion that, yes, you want to follow your truth in your heart. And how can I be of service? But how can I actually understand the soul and why people are doing what they're doing? And so, how much further can we get if we just address these fundamental needs that no matter where you are, people care about basic needs like safety and health and hunger. And so, then later on so I then worked on sanitation in schools, across 269 districts in India to think about well, how is it that we can provide, what happens when you provide toilets, just very basic ways of containing waste and private places for kids to go. And, what you see is that, yes, it matters for girls, but it also matters for boys, where we don't talk enough about the need for privacy for boys, because there's such a stigma for them to be able to talk about these psychological issues. And, if we could just allow pubescent age boys to think about their their need for privacy and, what again can make them feel comfortable, it actually could potentially solve a lot of issues down the line. So I know that we are at time, and so I don't want to, take too much of your time, but it's been an honor to be with you all. And thank you so much for inviting me.
And Nileshi, does he have more time so he can talk for another 5 minutes?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, go ahead, Anjali. Generally, Nileshi don't allow, but you can take another 5 minutes.
Well, I mean, I don't want to keep people, but I'm happy to keep. Yeah. So, and so actually it's really informed kind of my research generally, where, so I'm a professor at the University of Chicago, for those who don't know, and I study economics of education, and most of my work is based in India. And basically all of my questions come from the interactions that I've had with people and with families. And so again, before I went into this work, I had been told parents don't care about their daughters. They just want to get them married off. They don't care. And it made me remember and realize, like, we really have to approach everyone with compassion. And this assumption that people really assume that what they're doing is the right thing. Now, it doesn't mean that everything that we're doing is right. We are all works in progress. I tell my children regularly, I am making mistakes and I am not perfect. And, I want to open up that dialogue with them to say, look, if I'm not doing something right, I want you to tell me, because I'm learning constantly too, and I am growing. And in some ways, I think by opening up that conversation with them, then they can also say, oh, great, like, that's right. And I don't have to be perfect, and nothing is perfect, but we can always be striving to be better. And, I think that by remembering that, then we can be more compassionate with ourselves and with the people who we interact with. And so I just, from there, I did some work on economic security and clothing. And, now I'm doing some work in Chicago related to justice. So, again, a fundamental need is this feeling that you belong and that you're cared for and that you're listened to and that you're a whole human being. And so if you go to school and you're not treated like a whole human being, if people always assume that what you're doing is wrong, or always assume that you're going to do badly in school, or always assume, the worst of you, you're not being treated with your full humanity. And so, there's this notion with, it's like when children do something where, when you want to react to some behavior. So if someone does something wrong, if they've drawn the walls, or, they kick somebody or whatever, a lot of times people react in a very punitive way, right? So it's about punishment and retribution. But the question is, what are you really teaching a child when you do that, right? You might be actually just teaching them that the best way to resolve a conflict is through punishment or through anger, as opposed to what happens if we really try to think about this in a relational sense of restoring a relationship. That if we sit down between that, if the person who did something that hurt somebody else, and you bring that person who was hurt, and now that person who was hurt says, this is how it made me feel. That made me feel really bad. That can actually have really fundamental, benefits and improvements in terms of restoring a relationship or transforming a relationship. And so now in schools, there's this increase of something called restorative justice. And so what we see in Chicago, for example, is after they put restorative justice in schools, there are fewer out of school suspensions, there are fewer arrests, there's fewer crimes that are committed, and there is this greater sense of an improvement in school climate and in school culture. And so, again, just thinking about what are these fundamental needs, what do we all need to feel like full human beings? And then the final thing is, if you don't see yourself represented in the world, right? So in the US, for example, most of the people who are represented in books are people who are white. In India and anywhere around the world, how often do you see people who are in wheelchairs or who have glasses or who have potentially different shades in terms of their skin color? And you need to see people who look different than you in all of these different ways to really kind of realize the potential that lies within everybody. And so, so these are some of the areas within my research. And, as I said, it's all driven by the experiences that I've had and that, the people who I interact with. And so, as I said, it's in the end, it's always following my truth and my heart. And, it's constantly questioning myself, like, is this feeding myself? And is this useful? Is this something that can, actually help in some way such that I am not just feeding myself, but it's hopefully feeding the world in some way. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. आपका कंट्रीब्यूशन बहुत ही बेहतरीन, मतलब मैंने कभी सुना नहीं आज तक कि कोई यूएस से आके इंडिया में 2 साल किसी को सर्व कर सकता है. आपने, मुझे ऐसा लग रहा है कि हम लोगों को सोचने पे मजबूर कर दिया है कि हमने भी हमारे देश के लिए कुछ करना चाहिए. थैंक यू वेरी मच. मतलब मेरे लिए बहुत ही इंस्पायरिंग था ये सेशन. इट्स वेरी वेरी इंस्पायरिंग. मतलब मैंने कभी जिंदगी में नहीं सोचा था कि कोई अपना कंट्री छोड़ के 2 साल किसी और कंट्री में जाके सर्व कर सकता है. इट्स बियॉन्ड इमेजिनेशन. इट्स ऑन द कोर्ट कंट्रीब्यूशन.
धन्यवाद. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's on the court contribution. It's like a never heard. विनय जी, I was not having any idea कि आपकी बेटी को आपने ऐसे संस्कार दिए. Thank you very much.
Very lucky. अंजलि जब इंडिया गई और जब अहमदाबाद में थी, she worked in the slum areas, और हम लोगों को विश्वास नहीं होगा कि जो अंजलि जाती थी तो स्ट्रीट पे जो ह्यूमन वेस्ट होता था उसको अंजलि और उसके फ्रेंड्स जो अमेरिका से आए थे वो सब साफ करते थे. और साफ इसलिए करते थे कि लोकल आदमी को दिखाना है कि साफ करने में कोई हर्जा नहीं है, क्लीन करना चाहिए, सफा रखना चाहिए. मैंने कहा मेरी बेटी अमेरिका में पैदा हुई, अमेरिका में रही है और इंडिया में जाके ये कर रही है. सो हम बहुत प्राउड हैं उसके. थैंक यू अंजलि. It was very good talk.
Thank you, Anjali. That was
Thank
nice.
you so much.
And Nilesh, thank you for allowing her to give this extra time.
Yeah, मैं एक्चुअली अंजलि कभी समय नहीं देता, लेकिन आपका जैसे स्टार्ट हुआ कॉन्वर्सेशन एंड व्हेन यू सेड ना कि you came to India just to contribute, that मैं at that moment I was a very different human being. मुझे ऐसा लगा कि आपको 20 मिनट के लिए नहीं, I should invite for 2 hours.
Well, I mean, I should be clear. The time in India, that time when I first went, it grew me more as a human being than I could ever give. So to be clear, in the end, it was very selfish. I mean, I learned so much and grew so much as a human being and became so humbled and realized just how much I don't know and what amazing, beautiful people. I felt this great privilege that this is where my roots are from. And, I think often, I have 2 children. How can I make sure that they also have such an experience and that they can make a connection as well? And, with COVID, we obviously can't go immediately, but, it is my definite intention that I want them to also be engaged. And I'm grateful for the time and grateful for the people who welcomed me into their homes and their hearts and their lives.
Thank you very much. आप लोगों के लिए एक अनाउंसमेंट है, सिर्फ 2 मिनट रुक जाइए प्लीज. संडे को बहुत स्पेशल सेशन हो रहा है यूथ के लिए, 4 बजे से लेके 5:30, 4 PM to 5:30. और ये सेशन मतलब उनके लाइफ को पूरा एक नया टर्निंग पॉइंट हो सकता है, उनकी जिंदगी को पूरा चेंज कर सकता है. मेरा आप सभी से निवेदन है, ये सेशन स्पेशली डिजाइन किया है एज 14 to 25 के लिए। तो आप जितने भी आपके पहचान के लोग होंगे जिनका एज 14 to 25 है, उन लोगों ने ये सेशन मिस नहीं करना चाहिए। जो अंजलि जी कर रहे हैं वही बात को नर्चर करने के लिए ये सेशन रखा हुआ है, मतलब उसी बात को हम एंडोर्स करना चाहते हैं। तो मैं चाहूंगा कि आप बेहिचक ज्यादा से ज्यादा लोगों को इनवाइट कीजिए। मैं आपको उसका फ्लायर भी शेयर करता हूँ, इनविटेशन भी शेयर करूंगा, और मैं कोशिश करूंगा अंजलि जी कि आप जो कार्य कर रहे हैं वैसा ही कार्य में मैं जल्दी ही जुड़ जाऊँ। आई प्रॉमिस यू कि मैं आई एम गोइंग टू डू द स्ट्रीट स्कूलिंग इमीडिएटली।
Oh, wonderful.
मुझे ना ऐसा ऑन द कोर्ट काम करने में बहुत अच्छा लगता है, मतलब बातें करना और ऑन द कोर्ट काम करना। मुझे ऐसा लगता है फिर आर्मी वाला फीलिंग आता है कि आर्मी के लोग है ना सीधा काम करते हैं, दे डोंट टॉक, दे डू इट।
Now, Anjali, can you give them ideas how others can start a street school in their own town? Like the number of people, something simple. Is there any contact at Gandhi Ashram or somewhere they can?
But it's actually really, it's not even, that's why I think in some ways calling it a school makes it sound like something very structured. It really just starts with a conversation. Like, as I said, when I got to India, I didn't know Gujarati at all. We're not from Gujarat, but I learned my numbers, and you can say, you know, ek ana ek, you know, and make this, it's literally just starting with very simple math, and it's very fun. Kids know this stuff and they deal with money all the time. So actually they know math really well. And so it's really just engaging and just sitting down and treating them like human beings. And, you know, it could be a 5-minute conversation, and starting that way and building that trust and that relationship, opening up a tiffin box and saying, come, let's eat together, you know, and actually sitting down on the steps or on the ground, you know, putting a little gadana and whatever, and just starting very simple, because you actually have to build the trust. It's not that you just suddenly can open up, you know, some school and say, come. You want it to be something where everyone feels this ownership. And, you know, if everyone comes on their own and it takes patience and time, then you will actually start having people come. And what's nice is that you can always just, yeah, as I said, bring a tub of khichdi and, you know, have a pot of water where people make sure that they wash their hands. And you keep it very simple at the beginning and then let it grow over time. And it's just something you literally could just do today. It's just, there's kids, there's unfortunately, you know, homelessness all over the place, and kids who are out of school and, you know, but who would love to learn. And there's fun ways to do it. And, you know, whatever it is that you are moved to do is a way to start. It's very simple. You don't need an organization to help you at all.
Yeah, thank you very much Anjali. विनोद जी, thank you very much. संडे को याद रखिए यूथ के लिए सेशन है 4 PM to 5:30 PM. I'm inviting you to invite lot of people. Thank you. Bye bye. See you. मिलते हैं कल सुबह.
Thank you, Anjali.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anjali.